window where we can do a restore to a point?
Like the restore wizard?
Is there like?
I would assume so. I clicked the wrong link.
No, it probably wants to authenticate so it can actually do the file parsing or out of the gate.
Oh, gotcha. Oh,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, so you
Yep,
could go in here
can be done.
and you could, again, same restore experience, just pull it back from Azure instead of local. Yes, Julie?
What's your preferred method to manage retention of your backup files on Azure storage?
Good question. We use a lot of, having to learn a lot of PowerShell to do that. But yeah, the short answer is a lot of PowerShell. So, yes.
I've had history where if I just back up to a share like this, it gets super fragmented. Does Azure do anything to reduce the amount of fragmentation? Because backup files are usually all different sizes, especially if you're doing trans dumps and stuff like that. Have you had any issues or noticed anything like that?
I haven't noticed anything, and I think at this point, I mean, for me, that's kind of a lot of, that extra work, the voodoo that Microsoft takes care of under the covers.
Okay.
I can look into it
Okay.
and let you know, but I haven't had any obviously negative experiences that we can tie back to that from a backup rate perspective. But okay. Were there any other questions? No? All right, then we'll keep going. Okay, now we're going to talk about hosting our files out in Azure. Okay, the primary reason you might consider doing this, okay, and let me start with a disclaimer. Okay, remember we said latency happens, right? Any workload, even if it's your backup workload that you are considering porting into, even in a hybrid scenario, porting into Azure, you need to know your workload. Okay, under no circumstances am I saying, if you're running databases for the stock market, should you just toss that out in Azure and assume that you're going to get acceptable performance? Even when you're thinking about this from a hybrid perspective, you need to know, what the limitations are. You need to know how your workload, processes throughout the day, so that you can make an informed decision about whether it's even a good fit initially for Azure. Okay. So that being said, you do now, starting in SQL Server 2014, have the option to, instead of hosting your data and log files on some on-prem SAN or wherever, you can host them out in Azure. Okay? One very powerful reason to do this is it allows you to separate, you can pay for the storage piece of it out in Azure, and you're going to pay as you're pulling some data out. So you've got to be conscious of, of the use case for these databases. But you're not going to pay for compute because compute's still sitting on-prem. Okay, you can have the biggest, baddest, fastest servers you want, and they're still going to be yours to manage. And there's not going to be the compute part of the bill for Microsoft because it's not happening over there. Okay, so like backups, when we want to host data files out in Azure, first thing we have to do is create a credential. Okay, so in this case, we're going to create a credential, and this is out to another storage space. Okay, it's a new storage space. Doesn't have to be. I just happen to create another one. And here's the container name, CN host files. Let me get that up there so you guys can see that. Now, unlike when we were backing up and restoring to and from Azure, when we do this, we're going to create. We need to access something called a shared access signature, which is the secret that we're going to apply to the credential. The shared access signature is simply a more granular set of permissions. It needs read, write, delete, and there was one other one that I'm forgetting right now, to the storage space. Whereas with the access keys we were talking about before, you have the access key to a storage account. I mean, you own it completely. It's yours to do with as you wish. So this is a little more secure of an option. This is where Azure PowerShell comes in handy, or there's a tool called Azure Storage Explorer, which I pulled off of Codeplex. where you can actually connect to your storage accounts, and it'll generate the shared access signature.
The Cloudberry Explorer is really useful that way too.
I'm sorry,
The Cloudberry Azure Explorer is also really useful.
oh, okay, great. Okay, so we're just gonna go ahead and create our credential. Nothing fancy going on there. We'll go ahead and get that storage account viewable in the management studio. Again, looks just like the storage account we were looking at before. Okay, and then we're gonna create our database, okay? Create database syntax is gonna look very similar, or very familiar with everything except the file name. When you put in the file name, again, this is our storage account, this is our container, and again, we're gonna have an MDF, we're gonna have an LDF. We're gonna go ahead, we're gonna create those.
So you have no control over where your MDF file and LDF files are, or any other secondary files, right?
You have some options when you're creating the storage account with regard to type of disk and all of that. But if you're talking about actual physical location and whether it's like co-located with other things, I mean, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, we got some really, we got some really unusual situations. We have one, database that is very unusual. And we actually have, this sounds crazy, but the temp DB alone is about 600 gigabytes, and we got a log file that large because of some of the constraints. And I'm just wondering, when you have something like this, like we had some issues, running some very large transactions.
Mm-hmm.
We're running, read, what's that, I'm trying to think, it's basically risk, read committed
Snapshot
snapshot
isolation, yep. Yep, you're doing
isolation.
reversioning.
And we can run into some really odd scenarios
Mhm,
where it'll
sure.
just hold the transaction open, and that's why
Yep.
the temp DB gets large and the log
Sure.
file gets very large.
I,
And, I mean, we literally had to do some emergency things while this was processing.
yeah.
And I'm just trying to see how something like this is, where all of a sudden if we had something like that, how we could respond with some vendor.
Sure. Well, I think the
running
answer
into
is,
space issues.
you could absolutely host that in Azure. Again, I think you'd wanna evaluate whether or not you would want to, based on, you know, your requirements.
Yeah,
But again, I mean, in this case, I mean, you know, the database is a database is a database.
yeah.
Just so happens that the files are gonna be out there. If you need to grow the file, you need to do I mean, nothing else changes in this scenario, except with regard to where the files actually reside. So,
And file segregation is somewhat moot once you start talking about some of the larger SAMs, which
Right.
are gonna hack this just because you have so many spindles, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but they still have to set up a logical.
Correct. I
Space,
mean, there's still
yeah,
stuff
so I'm
within Windows for write threads and stuff like that. but
Yeah.
That would still apply whether you're Azure or
Yeah,
in-house dependent on your SAN size and your.
Yeah, I don't wanna hijack the whole conversation. I just know that we had some issues earlier, a couple of months ago, and we're running extreme IO, so if we wanna expand drive space, we can do it fast.
Your storage space, underlying storage space for an Azure thing is 500 terabytes for space.
Question is, how quickly can we spin that up if we needed that?
It's that,
Is that on
you
our
don't
old
do
SAN?
that.
I know on our old SAN, it took a while for our OS team to handle that. You know, if we told them and said, hey, we need you to add, you know, a couple hundred
If you
gigabytes or something like that,
You
you
don't
know.
set it at the beginning
yeah.
in Azure.
And I think if you're talking anything of that size and those level of performance needs, I mean, I'd be having a chat with Microsoft to talk about those very
Yeah,
specific
yeah.
items.
No, I'm just trying to see how it applies. I don't wanna
Yep,
hijack the whole
alright.
lecture here.
Okay, so we've created the one database. I went ahead and created another, because when I gave this at our local user group, they said, hey, can I put my data file in Azure and my log file on-prem? I said, I don't see why not. And sure enough, you can. So, I think you could do it the other way around too if you so desired. So if you take a look at the database properties that you just created, again, database is a database is a database. The only thing you're gonna notice here that's different is where these files are actually located, okay? Rather than a, you know, an on-prem location, you have a URL for your files. Okay?
Hey, Paul,
Yes,
I'm assuming you just create different file groups and have those files in Azure too, right? There's nothing stopping
I
you from
wouldn't,
doing that?
yeah, I wouldn't see why not. Paul? Yes, sir.
Have you used this in production?
Have I used this in production? Not production, we're proof of concepting it and for a couple small systems. We have a number of,
So what's the driver for you to implement this on those systems?
the driver for me to implement this is kind of twofold. First of all, we have, you know, a lot of these smaller systems which are sitting on larger boxes, which might right now be co-housed with other larger systems. So we can move that, you know, we can move that off of there, we can host the data files out there, and again, we split the compute and the storage. The other piece is it's actually, you know, I mean, we know the cloud isn't coming, the cloud is here. And we know that we need to start looking at this from an underlying storage perspective, you know. Is it beneficial to be using this over, you know, the insane SSD array down the hall for these very small systems? And so we're, you know, that's the driver for us is, you know, a lot of the stuff that doesn't require the workload that these flash arrays that we're buying, you know, can handle. Why not port them off to something like Azure? So. For some reason, Zoom has decided to get stuck.
Escape?
Yeah. No dice.
Alt F4. And X.
Wow.
It said
Wow, this is a little
control
interesting.
+1 or something. Go back to your Zoom window, I told you how to do it.
Usually it's just escape. That works. Kill Zoom it. Alright, sorry about that. Okay, so the other thing too now, keep in mind that I can even now restore a database. I just restored on-prem from an Azure, I just created a database, hosting the data files, you know, in Azure, and the database engine and all the compute power sitting on-prem. So keep in mind that I can even restore a database from an Azure source, specifying Azure as the destination. Okay, keep in mind, I've got the two storage accounts I created. I got my backrest storage account, and I've got this new one for hosting files. So if I want to do a restore, and I want to use the backups of the VentureWorks database that I created when we were talking about backups and restores, all I need is for this SQL Server to be able to access those backup files, okay? So when we're thinking about these different storage accounts, think about them just like you would in the context of, you know, they're just different SANs, they're just different network locations. So all I need to do is go ahead and create this credential over here with my, you know, to my MNDBA backrest storage account so that this instance of SQL Server can access those backup files. Okay, easy enough. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a full restore. Okay, and the source for the restore is going to be that AdventureWorks backup that I did in the previous demo. But rather than saying restore it on-prem, put the data in the log files on-prem, I'm simply going to tell it to put the data in log files out in the other storage account. that we were just using before, where we created those other databases. So I can run that, so it's taking the backup files from this Azure storage account, and when it's, it's talking to my on-prem instance of SQL Server, and it's saying, hey, instead of placing the files down here, place them out in this Azure storage container. So again, finish, leave it in a non-recovered state. We'll go ahead and run the other two. And we can see over here, it's actually in a restoring state. Again, I'm using all the compute power here to process that restore, but I'm keeping all the data files, both the backup files that I'm using as a source, and where I'm writing them to are out in the Azure storage account. Okay. I'm just going to recover our database. We're good to go. So again, the benefits, like we've talked about, allows you to separate the compute and the storage. Again, as I was, to Grant's question, a big driver for us is our CIO is challenging us. Hey, we're bringing in these huge EMC, these huge, pure storage SANs. These flash arrays, they're not cheap. But what, we run a lot of, our SQL Server environment. We have somewhere between, I think we're around 1,700 production databases. A lot of those are kind of these, little, Dr. So-and-so went to a conference and came back with a piece of software. So they're not the type of system that by themselves would warrant having to run on a large flash array. But we have other very large systems which drive us in that direction.
So you're running Extreme IO also?
We are.
Okay. But you're
So-
using, basically what you're trying to do is use this for the small applications.
Absolutely. And we
Yeah,
can
that's what
focus,
you should be
yep,
doing.
and we can let the Extreme IOs of the world focus on our EMR. So, and this is definitely, for us, a more cost-effective solution than bringing in, either running it on the flash array or bringing in some, yet another SAN that we probably don't have room for in the data center.
With your POC, have you done monitoring the network and internet bandwidth level just to see what happens when you restart SQL, when you run integrity checks, when you're doing really the high
Right.
IO type things?
A little bit, we're just getting into that. So, but yeah, it's on our checklist of, again, we kind of go in knowing for these smaller systems that we have much, that we have a greater gray area as far as performance is concerned. We have yet to actually quantify that, but it's on our POC list. Yes,
Have you tried log shipping with this?
I have not, but you can. So we're going to talk about high availability quick here in just a minute.
So if you're looking at performance on that, can you use your normal metrics like average disk seconds per read or write? And does that correlate or is with come across?
I
the net?
believe so. Are there?
Have you looked at that?
We're just kind of getting into that. I don't
Okay.
see why, I don't see why it wouldn't apply because again, especially where we got the compute here, I mean, it's still about how long is it taking to read and write to that given file. So,
It would be a SQL Server counter that you
Right,
wouldn't be able to get OS level metrics. 'cause
Well, I
that's
was
on
just
drive.
wondering, from the round trip on there, if that's gonna be reflected in that.
so it's some information we're soon to find out. So there is,
Yeah, I just had a related question.
Mhm.
Have you had to make any changes to your standard monitoring tools or strategies in order to monitor the system effectively?
not at the moment. We're lucky, we're strictly a SQL Sentry shop, and they have a lot of options to allow us to monitor out into the cloud. But once we kind of do an initial proof of concept, we're gonna take that a little broader and make sure that, again, it's obvious, even though we have more of a gray area for performance on some of these smaller systems, we do still need to make sure that we can, validate, whether things are going right or when they're going horribly wrong. So. Okay. Yes, sir.
Is Power BI solutions at all being voiced in your organization, or is anybody else getting that where they're really kind of pushing for the full capability of Power BI?
Not in mine. So, all right, so real quick, we're gonna touch on just high availability. We're not actually gonna click anything here because it wasn't working so well last night. But that's fine, I wanna make sure we get to the stretch stuff. As far as high availability is concerned, this demo, when it works, is actually for mirroring. Does anybody wanna guess why I chose mirroring?
You can just do a single table.
No. Chose it, again, just because I don't need a domain to make it work. And building out the domain infrastructure was just simply more work than necessary. But in a nutshell, again, on-prem, I've got my database that, that is my primary for mirroring. And then I have a VM sitting out in Azure running SQL Server, where I restore via the same, via similar processes that I showed you before. Well, it'll be a VM running SQL Server, so you'll actually be able to connect to the SQL Server instance through Management Studio. But so you restore a standby copy of the database on that VM out in Azure, and then you just mirror between the two. It's no different than if it were on-prem. Okay, so if your on-prem one goes down, presuming mirroring is configured correctly, the copy out in Azure picks up. You can also log ship out to Azure. You can span availability groups out into Azure. So we just won't go into it too in depth here because we could do a whole session on just that topic. So. Okay. Yes, sir.
Is there any concern with the security, like if you have AD authentication going out to Azure with that VM? Is that seamless as well if you would fail on your primary? Is all the security and authentication handled?
It can be. That we're going to get a little bit in there into how you get Azure integrated into your environment and your AD. That's not really my area of expertise, but the answer is it will absolutely work. How you configure that to make sure that it works. All right, so we have about 15 minutes left. Okay, so we're going to talk about one of the newest, coolest features in SQL Server 2016. Who here works for an organization that has a very well-defined, everybody completely understands, data retention policy?
It's actually not bad for us.
Okay. For my organization, we have one. It's pretty much keep everything forever. Okay? So there's this new concept, or this new functionality within SQL Server 2016 called stretch database. Think of it this way. You have a table of archive data. Okay? It doesn't necessarily need to be a whole table, but we'll get to that in a minute. The simplest example is you have a table of archive data. It's chewing up a lot of space in that database, okay? It's chewing up a lot of space on that really expensive flash array, okay? Nobody's ever touching it. But for whatever reason, you need to hold on to it, whether it's regulatory, you can't get, whomever necessary at the C level to agree that you can delete this data, whatever. It's taking up space, and it's in essence a waste of money because, you're burning some pretty serious, flash storage there, and nobody's ever accessing the data. So imagine a scenario where you can take that data, just that data, that table, and you can port it up into Azure, okay? And SQL Server, well, it knows what's going on, but ultimately it's none the wiser. You go to query that data, yeah, you're gonna see some latency because it's actually gotta go pull it out of Azure, as opposed to pulling it from the on-prem data source. But you know what? It's old archive reporting data. Tell your folks, you know what? If you choose to run a report that's gonna span 10 years worth of history, you should expect it to be a little slow, okay? So that's the basic premise behind stretch database. So I got a link here at the top, some great information out there about StretchDB. So we're just gonna walk through a couple quick examples of how this works. So the first thing we're gonna do is there's an SP configure option called Remote Data Archive. When you're talking StretchDB, you're gonna see the letters RDA a lot. So that's what it's referring to, Remote Data Archive. So we're gonna tell the instance that you're configured for Remote Data Archive. Okay, that's all good. So we're gonna use a copy of AdventureWorks 2016. The requirement we have is that within that database, all we have to do is we have to create a master key. Okay, that's fine. So we're gonna create a master key with a horribly complex password. Okay? Great. So we've done that. We've taken the first few steps. So now if we look at the status of this table that we're going to stretch out into Azure, okay? We're gonna do an SP space used on this table. And we're gonna look local only, remote, and then all. So basically give me a summary of space used for those three scenarios. When I run that, it's gonna bark at me, and I hope they fix this. Okay, it's gonna bark at me about the remote only option because we haven't stretched anything out to Azure. I told it to go tell me what's out there, and it's like, there's nothing out there. And so it returns an error. But here's some basic information. Locally, this is what I'm storing. And this is the total, so that makes sense. Okay? So if I come back here, now we're gonna launch into a wizard, because everybody loves a wizard. Okay, we're on our 2016 instance. We're gonna look for our sales order tracking table. There you go, you right click. Okay, now I'm running, this is actually RC0, so I'm a little bit behind, but I'm running one of the newer versions of Management Studio. My brain wasn't working the other night, and I tried to do this in Management Studio 2014. Took me forever to figure out why I didn't see the stretch option. Okay, so we say stretch, we say enable. We get a wonderful wizard. All right, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna tell it what table do we want to stretch. Okay, well, it's the table I selected. You're going to see some warnings here. This is actually gonna be about a primary key constraint. There are still, and it's actually changing from release candidate to release candidate, there are certain things that are not, that you can't do in stretch tables. In this case, in RC0, it's not going to enforce the primary key constraint, okay? If that's an issue, don't stretch the table. But I mean, again, if you're talking just about a mass pile of some archive data, that's, you know, maybe that's not gonna be a concern. So, I'm just gonna say next. It says, hey, you need to log into Azure. Okay, I can do that. Think about it for a second. Here's my subscription. We're not going to create it out in Australia. We're going to go North Central US. I have an option here. And this is where do I want to stretch the data to? Okay? In this version, in release candidate 0 for 2016, the data was still residing in an Azure SQL DB. Okay? Starting with, I'm going to say if it was RC1 or RC2, there's a new stretch database service that Microsoft is rolling out. The benefits of that over the SQL Azure DB as the destination is for the stretch database service. They're hoping that by RTM you're going to be able to house up to 1 petabyte of information if you wanted to push it out there. And it's also going, the stretch DB service, they're going to be billing compute and storage separate, which is a difference there. So we're going to go ahead and tell it to create a new one. Obviously those passwords don't happen. Try this again. There we go. Oh, it wants the database master key that we created in that database. So, we're going to give this a second. 25% chance it errors out, but we'll see. So, one thing, what did you notice that when I chose the table, I mean, what are we stretching? What amount of data are we stretching? Okay. The entire table. Okay? That's through the wizard. Wouldn't it be really nice if you didn't have to stretch the entire table? So let's give this a second here, and then we'll show you how to stretch just a portion of the table. I think it's going to be mad at me.
are there performance improvements, like, I guess our scenario is that we're currently moving to a co-location setup for data centers plus Amazon and potentially Azure
Mhm.
for some applications, and so there's a benefit to staging some data closer to different
Sure,
resources. Is there a performance gain if you have an Azure server trying to read this data from that StretchDB node? Or is everything still coming through your main compute node?
Everything's gonna still be coming through. What's actually happening under the covers, the connection to the Stretch database is actually an internal hidden linked server
Okay.
within SQL Server. So what happens, at least right now, and again, I'd encourage you, if you're really interested in this, start playing around with it with the release candidates, because honestly, a lot of it is changing from release to release. But basically what's happening when you issue this query, it's actually at the same time querying the local and the remote sources, and then it's, automatically kind of marrying that together when it comes back, so. So the good news is it worked. Sweet, it's all done. If we look over here, we see a little, I'm paranoid to do zoom it again, but, okay, we see our little icon for our database has changed. Tells us that there's something in there that's been stretched out to the cloud. Okay, we're gonna quick reset that environment. Before we reset that, let me show you, if we go and we check, it's done being mad at me. If we run this same thing again, it's gonna take a minute, because now it's reading out of Azure, it's, oh, how much of my data do you have out there? Remember, latency happens on Wi-Fi, let's see, it was Saturday days. Okay, so what we can see, this is local right now, so it's in the process of actually pushing the data out there. And by the way, the data is completely available the entire time you're doing this. You can insert, update, read, whatever, okay? So we can see right now that we only have 1,245 rows left on-prem, and it's got about 11,000 of them out in Azure. So we run that again, which we won't take the time to do. It'll show us eventually that we have 0 on-prem, and it's all sitting out in the Stretch database.
Are you
Yes,
gonna
sir.
tell us about, we use a lot of partitioning? Is that easy to do with stretch databases?
I
or-
believe you can stretch a database based on partition. I have not tried it myself yet,
Okay.
but I believe that is something you can do. Okay, so we're gonna reset that environment quick. We got just a couple minutes left. So while that's resetting, we'll go ahead and step through here.